Hello and welcome back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast channel. We are reading the Parmenides and doing our best to discover what philosophy is, how philosophy can make our lives better, how we can use philosophy in our world to reach our highest goals and discover what they are, and how exactly we should approach philosophy, how we should use the logos, which is the tool of philosophy, the method of philosophy, through the power of the dialectic, what those two things are, to become philosophers ourselves and benefit from philosophy. That's what we've been doing, and we've been reading the Parmenides to do those things, solve those questions, solve those puzzles, answer those questions, and also to discover what does Parmenides think is the ultimate. What does Parmenides see? Parmenides, of course, the teacher of Socrates. Socrates, the teacher of Plato. Plato, the guy who wrote all the books about the Platonic dialogues and began the academy, the first university in the West, set up in Athens around 2,500 years ago. Right, the spiritual and intellectual Western tradition that is really our human birthright. Why? Because it's the rational method. It is the use of the mind to know the mind and the self, which is our purpose here. That's what we're here for. That's what we can do. Of course, as we are humans, we face not just the logos, but we face the anti-logos. What's that? Counterattacks or the objections to that path. Why? It's part of the process. It's part of the learning as a human being. So we're looking at two things, as we do in most of what we learn in philosophy. Look for the thing and look for its opposite, or look for its negative reflection. So for the logos, we have the anti-logos or the pathologos that leads to your problems or your blocks or your limits, and we have our destiny at the end of the path of the logos. To slay the block goblins and to traverse that path to the ultimate goal makes us adventurers, true adventurers. The adventurers, that is the archetype on which all games and movies and anime and TV shows you like, in which there's a hero on a hero's journey, are based. Right, we are every game that you've watched and game that you played and show that you've watched is nothing but a training for awakening philosophy, awakening yourself to the true quest of the self logos to the self, using the self through the self logos to discover the self. That's what we're doing. Speaking of self logos, we have a book in which a young Socrates has asked his teacher Parmenides, what is the self? Because I'm interested in this logos quest. I want to know what the logos is. I want to know what the dialectic is, how to organize your thinking in a certain kind of specific way, certain specific terms, in a specific order, following a rational progression that you can follow along and use to talk to people. I want all that. I hear that's called the dialectic. You've explained it to me, but I want an example. Can you do it for me? Give me one. Go on. Thank you, Socrates, for asking that question. But I don't just want an example of the dialectic. I want you to give me the highest possible dialectic. Now, normally those sorts of questions don't fly in philosophy. Tell me what the self is like telling the hero asking some NPC, hey, slay the dragon for me. Well, no, it wouldn't be a game if the NPC defeated the final boss for you. Tell me what the self is. But there are certain conditions present in this particular dialogue that makes it rare and unique, in which Parmenides says, okay, you know what? I'll do it. And even his student hasn't heard him you do a dialectic on the self for a very long time. So it's very rare. It's so rare that the character in the story, Cephalus, the first character in the story of the Parmenides, has traveled to see Adimantos, who is going, and then both of them go and see Antiphon. And it's such a memorable and rare and significant conversation that he hasn't memorized. Oh my God, this is a recount from someone. And by the way, he wasn't even there himself. He heard it from Pythagoras, who memorized it. He was there, he heard it, he memorized it, talked about it over and over again. Shared it with his friends. It was an object of love and focused attention for him, as it was for Antiphon, as it is for us. We're going back to it. Every day we're going to, every day I am reviewing and going further into this text. You can follow along and have some coffee with you if you like. That's what this is here. This is some milk and some coffee and cheese. Fortunately, we have this rare scroll of this rare conversation of the dialectic, which we want to master, using the logos, which we are learning, on the self, which is the ultimate goal of the philosopher. Why? This is the exercise of our understanding. In our three-dimensional physical world, this is as much like ousia, or the next dimension, as we can function. So it's a training, it's a preparation, and we are becoming like the realm of being, which we are interested in because we want to know the truth about things, truth about justice, the truth about beauty, the truth about reality. And in philosophy, Parmenides points out, well, hang on a second, these aren't concepts. These aren't artifacts of language. That is one way of thinking, but it's not the truth. That's why we do this. This is why this kind of activity is considered empty talk and a useless activity by those who don't realize that there is a realm of being. And that's the task for the philosopher. There's a metaphor in Plato's Republic: leaving the cave of ignorance that you see through your senses to the outside world. That outside world represents this realm of being, where you can see the things in themselves. So, we've learned the exercises that we need to be practicing on those ideas, on those terms, on those ideas in being. And that would be a preparation for this text, because Parmenides is using those ideas as he goes on to his dialectic on the one self. Dialectic has two ideas put together to explain something. Of course, if somebody said, what is a bike? You can't just say, oh, it's a bike. You might need to use other terms that someone is familiar with to explain the qualities of the bike. Somebody knows what it is. Likewise, the most purest expression of that is the dialectic. Two key ideas smashed together, smooshed together. So what's the subject that we're after? Self. And what is the subject of this dialectic that's being used as the adjective to be joined with the self to describe the self? One. He thinks the self is the one self. Of course, there are many different kinds of ones. There's a one that's a part. There's a one that's a whole. There's a one that is, what else do we have? There's a one that is disconnected from all other ones. There's a one that has a kind of force or function. There's a one that is just a physical thing. There's a one that doesn't even exist. There's not even a physical thing. Nihilism, right? So there are many different kinds of ones. And he's going to run through the 9 key types of ones. And the first one is his hypothesis. First one that he outlines is the kind of one that he thinks is the self. And that's what we want. Because we're budding adventurers ourselves, we're interested in this thing. So thank goodness he starts at the top. So we need to exercise our mind on this speech, his hypothesis. Hypothesis, if one is, because it's just a hypothesis until you get there and you know it yourself, right? This is the training to get there. But until you do get there, it's a what if. And that's important because philosophy isn't just about believing somebody else. It's preparing yourself and exercising yourself to take that journey yourself. You wouldn't send your slave to the banquet in your place. If there's something good there, you'd want to have the delicious meals. So, what if the one is? If there is this kind of one that I'm saying describes the self, if the one self is, what follows? Okay? If the one self is, can it be many? Was our first argument. If it can't be many, can it be whole? Or can it be a whole if a whole is that which has lots of parts? Or can it be a part? Can't be either. That was the first argument that he made. Actually, let's jump in. Now that we have a summary of where we're going, where we've been, and what we're going to be doing today, let's jump in. Let's start with a brief summary of the argument so far, and then jump into the text and keep going. So, first argument. First argument of the first hypothesis of the logos of Parmenides. If one is, that's our hypothesis, and our subject is the one self. If one is, it cannot be many. Right? Now he asks that as a question. And this is how you do it. You ask it as a question. Now, some questions are kind of obvious. Like if you know what one means, then you know that it's the opposite of many. These are opposites. So if you're this one, you can't be this one. That kind of is straightforward. So the person he's talking to, young Aristoteles, says, oh yeah, no, I get that. How could it be many? Of course not. So he doesn't have to go into more depth. If one is, it's not many. Therefore, the self is not a part or a whole. So this is his conclusion. He makes a statement about one. Yep. And then he applies it to the self. So now we know something about the self. Using the one to understand the self, and vice versa. We don't quite understand this conclusion, so he explains it. Well, a part is in relation to the whole. So there's two there. And a whole has no part absent. That's what the word whole means. You have all of your parts. You're a whole. So both of these things have two. If it has two, it wouldn't be one, it would be many, because two is many. If one were whole or parts, it would be many and not one. But, and he makes it clear what we're doing, we're after the one self. Therefore, 3 dots mean therefore, the self is not whole nor parts. So the one self we're after is not a whole and it doesn't have parts. So his view of self, that you're after, and we're going to carry with us because we're going on the trip with him. We have a good reason to believe he might not be a dummy and he might be onto something. So it can be an object of our meditation. Me, myself, not my car or my clothes or my hat or my resume or what school I went to, but me, my actual self. Could it be true that it's not a whole of parts and it doesn't have parts? Interesting.
Wow.
Second argument. He uses the conclusion and he brings that forward with us. What we've learned about the one and the one self and the self. If it has no parts, then it can't have a beginning, middle, and end because these are parts. Of course. Makes sense? Give it a tick. And we can call the beginning and end of something its limits. Right? Makes sense? Beginning and the end of the limits. But self has no beginning and end. Why? Because it has no parts. No parts, therefore no beginning and end. Therefore, if the self has no beginning and end, the one is unlimited. An argument about the self applied to the one. So we go both ways. So the self has no parts, the self has no beginning and end. Interesting, right? What would that mean for yourself if you have no beginning and you have no end? And the one that is the self is therefore unlimited because it has no limits. What would that mean if you were unlimited? He's making that claim. He's no dummy. What would that mean for you? So, not a whole, not a part, not a many, not limited. We have an interesting positive. Is this a positive quality? It is unlimited because everything else so far has been removing. It's not limited. It's not part. It's not many. It's not a whole. This is a question. Is this a positive? Or is this just a way of saying it's not limited? This is a puzzle in the Parmenides because normally we have pairs of ideas. We have whole and part. We have one and many. These are the self-ver pairs that are used in the logos. Limited and unlimited is one of them. So is he saying it isn't this one, but it is this one? Is it like this, where it's this kind of a one, but it's not many? Or is it like this, where he's saying it's not a whole, it's not a part, it's not limit, and this is just a way of saying it's not limited? This is a question. Is this just the rejection of one quality, or is it an affirmation of another? What do I think? I don't know. I think he's done something special here. In the previous argument, he he defined what a part is. It's a quick definition, but we've got a lot to say. A part is defined in relation to a whole, and he also defined what a whole is. A whole is that which has no parts absent. Simple definition, but a definition all the same. And he rejects both of those. Well, he says they both are not the cell. Here he says it gives a definition of limits. Beginning and end of something. That's the limit. And it's not a limit, because that's a part. But unlimited, he did not define. What does it mean to be unlimited? He just made the claim, given that it's not has no limits, it is unlimited. Are we supposed to infer that unlimited is defined based on limits? If that was the case, then we could look at our idea of whole and part and say, hang on a second. Part is a part of a whole, so they're already connected. Actually, let's make some space for this down here. A part is already connected to a whole. And he said a whole is that which is not missing any of its parts. So the whole part, series of parts. And then he goes on to a limit. A limit is a beginning or end of something. Therefore, is unlimited something in relation to limit, like whole is in relation to part? Is unlimited therefore a series of limits? Well, actually, or is it something that has no limits? When we count, that's unlimited. But each term is a limit. Space, that's unlimited. But each point in space is a point in space, is itself a limit. Which kind of unlimited is he referring to? Because he rejects this. That's not the one self. That's not the one self. That's not the one self. But one of these is. question. Because we're seeing a pattern, right? He's going through, he seems to be removing qualities. Is this a removing of qualities? Is he just saying it's not limited and therefore it's unlimited, which is another way of saying it's not limited? Or is he actually saying it's got a specific quality? Can't be this one, right? Because these are all parts. Be many. Let's go back. Let's keep going. Take that question with you if you find it interesting. Then he went through circular and straight to make a conclusion that it can't have form. Why? Because circulars have a middle and extremes. And if you have a different way of arranging the extremes to the middle in line, it's a straight line. For a circle, all of the extremes are equidistant. We don't have a middle, we don't have extremes. So with no straight and no round, there's no form, because the one does not have parts like middle. So no form. Fourth argument. It cannot exist. Why? Because if it exists, it has to be existing in something or in itself. Can't be in something, because then it would be circularly contained by the container it's in. But we said the one is not partless, so it can't participate in the circle. We know this about the self already. We're taking it with us. Therefore, the self is not in itself either, because that would be two things. It would be the container that it's in and the thing contained be in itself. We've already said self is not two. Therefore, the one cannot be anywhere. Therefore, does not exist. Right? Those of you who have done math before might recognize he starts off with his statement. This is what I'm hoping to define by my argument. This is the overview. This is what I hope to demonstrate in my proof. Then here are the steps of proofs. Here is the conclusion. And then applied back to the original statement. This is the QED, or the final statement of the proof. Now, why do we care? Well, that's the form of mathematical statements, and anyone interested in Euclid's geometry will notice this pattern here, right? Actually, let's pull up what exactly those are. I should know them by memory, but Euclid structure. So what's the structure that Euclid uses in all of his propositions? All of the mathematical statements. So Euclid is a systematic way of understanding two-dimensional geometry. A series of proofs. Proposition states what is given and known and what is sought. The exposition clarifies what each what is given in the proposition and adapts it for the investigation. The determination makes clear what particular thing is sought after. Construction adds to what is lacking. Demonstration gives the proof. Okay, so he uses different language than I'm used to. So I'd say proposition, exposition, specification, construction, demonstration, and conclusion. Okay, pretty much the same. So why do we care about that? Well, we can see here similar parts. We can see a definition of what we want to see in the argument. We have a demonstration of why it's true. What do we want to see? That the one does not exist in any way. So whatever the one is that we're applying to the self isn't one of the ones that exists in being, because that would exist. It's not that kind of a one. Why? So that's definition. So let's go to a different color. Then we have a demonstration of why that has to be so. This is not in itself, or it's not in another. Demonstration. Now we have the argument break down into its key ideas. The division into its key ideas and how they are connected to each other is division. Division into the key ideas that follow. And when you take what's been divided and you synthesize it together, what for Euclid would be called that's what he calls the demonstration. Okay, so Euclid would call this construction. He constructs the argument, but we're calling it in philosophy, in the dialectic, division. But then we take it and we unify it together. That's the synthesis. Synthesis. Thesis. And then we apply that synthesis back to our what we want, what we defined as what we're after. So what was our synthesis? Our synthesis, after we've divided everything up in division, from these divided up arguments, we can make a conclusion. Therefore, the one is not anywhere. That's the synthesis from the arguments. Given that, it can't be in itself because it can't be circular. That's parts. Can't be in another because it'd be circularly comprehended. That's parts. Can't be that. This is the dividing of arguments. Can't be in itself. That would be two. Can't be two. We have a synthesis. Here. One cannot be anywhere. And then we have, applying it back to the start, we have analysis. Using that synthesis, analysis. Using that synthesized conclusion, apply it back to the start, to our definition. Oh, we're taking this other applying it back to the start. Or other back to it, the subject. This division is all of the different others. The demonstration is how the subject unfolds, and the demonstration is just a simple statement about the subject. So now we have our SS, SO, OO, OS, or our DD, DAS. Cool, huh? These were the three things we looked at previously. Those are two ways of understanding the dialectic. Self to self. What can you say about the thing itself? How does it function to others? How does it demonstrate? How does it divide in relation to other others? The other arguments in this case. Then how can you take those other arguments and synthesize them together and analyze them? DDAS or the OS model. So what was our conclusion? Well, the one does not exist. So we've got a whole list of things that the one isn't. Isn't that cool? Now, argument 5. Motion and rest. Okay, a new self-pair. Pair of terms that have a high existence in being that we recognize as key terms in the logos or key divisions in the logos that come as a pair, like whole and part, likeness and unlikeness. Motion and rest. This was the argument about motion. If it's moving in place, it's either rotating. Rotating requires middle parts, can't do that. Middle and parts because it's rotating around the middle. Can't be changing in place. It can't be altering itself because then it will go from a 1 to something else, to a 2 or 3 or something. Don't want that. Can't be moving place to place because if it starts off in a place, it would be in something. We've already said you can't do that. Can't be going into a place because then if you're moving into something, you have parts because as you're moving, part of it would be inside, part of it outside. Different part inside, different part outside, and so on. Therefore, the one is, so all of these things were arguments that we'd already defined about the self. And then we apply it to the other term, the one. Therefore, the one is immovable. No motion, another removal of a certain term of the self logos. Cannot apply this to the one that we're after. That's where we're at. Let's keep going. But we have certainly indeed also said it is impossible for self to be in anything. Yes, we have. Accordingly then, it cannot ever be in that which is self. Why then? What are you saying? Because then self would already be in that in which self is. Entirely so. But self was also found to be such that it can neither be in itself nor in another. It cannot. Accordingly, then, the one is never in the self. Wow. Okay. There's one that we're looking for, that's the one self, is not in the self. Interesting. Because we are looking for oneself. But most certainly, since it can never be in the self, then it will never be at rest, nor led to stand still. So we had for motion, it can't be moving or coming into motion. We did the becoming and the being aspects of motion. Now we're doing the same thing for rest. It will never be at rest or coming to be in rest or led to stand still. For it is not that it can be, for it is not such that it can be. Okay, that's a confusing way of saying I'm with you. Thank you, Aristotle. Accordingly, then, the one, as it is likely, neither stands still nor is moved. It certainly does not appear to be the case. It will certainly not indeed be the same. Okay, so now he goes on to same and other. So we can recognize a pair. We've got our adventurer caps on so we can recognize this. He kind of goes through the rest part quite quickly. It can't be in itself. So the one can't be in the self. So it can't be stationary or at rest. This is kind of a sparser argument, it seems. So something about being at rest is being in the self. Could this be because everything seeks the self? That's the nature of everything. Therefore, you'll never be at rest until you reach the self? Yes. Could it be also if you're at resting in something, you're resting in some kind of self? There is something that you're in. To be at rest, you can't be in the self. Or you can't be in itself or in the self. So you can't be resting in anything. Yes. Both levels, right? One is the physical, like physically as a physical form or something like a physical form, because we're not talking about just the physical. To be resting in something is you'd be in the self of that thing. Or yourself would be at rest in something. But we said it can't be in something. But then another way you could say, well, all things seek the self. Primarily, that's the ultimate final cause or the purpose to which everything that exists. You can't really be at rest until you get there. And the one can't be in the self. Two ways of looking at it, right? What happens when we have two ways of looking at it? We take both. So let's add it to our board. Can't be at rest. It would be resting in something. Or in self. And we said, self cannot be in itself or in another. Self is not in self or another. Self is not in self or another. Accordingly, then, the one is not in self. Actually, let's make some space for this guy. Let's move this up to its own spot here. So for rest, we can see these arguments that we've just outlined previously. The structure of the dialectic, that's part of what we're looking for. We're looking for the message, number one, but also the method, the structure, because that's what we want to learn for ourselves. So the question is, so let's look for the parts. We want to find the definition. This is where we ended. Can't be in motion. Now, is it impossible for self to be in anything? So here we go. Let's put it in. So we have our arguments. We have when you rest, you are resting in something. Or in self. And we said the self from what is already, or what has been, already proven or shown is not in anything or itself. Accordingly, then, the one is never in the self because it's the one self. Therefore, the one of the one self, that's the one we're after. is never in self. Interesting, right? The one that we are is not in something, it's not in ourselves. Therefore, can be, therefore it's not at rest or led, moving, or becoming. At rest or led to stand still was the quote. And then we have the final stage where we take this synthesis. So let's see if we can recognize the elements. The first thing is a definition. Where's the definition? What does he hope to achieve? Define your point that you want to make, Parmenides. So he's already gone through the motion stuff, so it'll be right at the start of that. Here we go. It is neither. It is neither stationary or being moved. That's his definition. It. Does he mean the self or the one? It's one of those two. Whatever it is, we'll get that at the end. Whatever it is, the one or the self is neither stationary or moved. Obviously, the one self. That's the definition. Now he has to demonstrate that. He addresses motion. Then we skip over to the rest part. That's what we're after now. Already done the motion. So after he concludes about motion, it's immovable. But now we're doing rest, starts here. But he seems to have skipped the quick proof because we're already talking about it. Like he could have given the quick proof. Aristotle usually says, I don't understand, and then we divide it up into its arguments. But we already know that Aristotle's not following, so we want to divide it up already. So now we have the division into its aspects, which is interesting because that's what we want to do to being itself, divide it up to its aspects. So when we do our exercises, the prior dialectics that we do on being, likeness, unlikeness, justice, whole, motion and rest are two of them. So what are we doing when we do our dialectic on motion or rest? We divide, we separate the aspects of being up into its particular divisions. Now, there's just one being. It's a one. That's the whole point of the first opening of the conversation. Socrates is confused. How can being be one if it has the qualities or aspects if you can intellectually distinguish from that mystical experience of pure being, if you can intellectually distinguish that it has unlikeness in it, it's unlike anything you've ever experienced, but it's also most like yourself. So it has both likeness and unlikeness. How can they both be there if it's a singular oneness? Right, the oneness that spiritual people talk about. It's a oneness of everything. Well, if it's oneness of everything, mystical, Buddhist, or hippie, or whoever you are, this is not derogatory. It's good that you seek mystical experiences. We all do, essentially, because it's the idea of the self, and it's good. It's goodness itself. But we have a question. Well, hang on a second. If it's everything, but how can it be everything if part of everything is unlikeness and likeness, and they're opposites? That's Socrates' question coming in. And there's a certain way of understanding that. But to do it, we have to divide being up into its parts, or not parts, because it doesn't have, not physical parts. They're intellectual distinctions you can make about that experience. So it's more like physics. If you think about physics, all of the laws of physics are all at once. But if you were somebody interested in parachuting, you might specifically look at the aspect of the laws of physics of gravity and wind resistance. You're pulling those out because that's what's most relevant to you when you're parachuting. Same here. We're pulling out the distinctions. We're dividing out and separating out the aspects of being to focus on, so we can understand it, so we can prepare ourselves to see it. Like likeness, or beauty, or justice. Now, that's what we did on each of our individual exercises when we did a dialectic on those things, because dialectic is dividing it out, separating it out, talking about its aspects, talking about its parts, talking about how it's functions, talking about its effects, talking about how those affected then relate back to it. What we did in that whole dialectic on motion, we're seeing in a synthesized form here. Because the one is a higher level. So in talking about the one, he has to say what it is, because he's going to apply that kind of one to the self. So here, he is doing a mini dialectic on motion. In a way. So we can see the dividing of a being into its aspects. So too, we can see the dividing of motion into its aspects, into an argument form. So we can understand whether or not motion can be applied to the one that he's talking about, or the self that he's talking about. So in our dialectic on motion, we have a definition, demonstration, division, and synthesis and analysis. So here we saw the definition. He didn't give a demonstration because he didn't give a brief summary of how his definition demonstrates itself to the argument, because Aristotle's already wants the division. He said, I don't follow, please explain it. So here we see the division into its arguments. We're dividing the parts of motion, just like we did in our dialectic on motion if we did one. But also just like we did in doing the dialectic itself on those exercises, because each dialectic itself is a division. This is what motion is, this is what justice is, this is what likeness is. So what are we seeing? We're seeing a symmetry. As above, so below. There is a symmetry to the logos. The logos applies to all of the different levels, reflecting itself through. So what we can see in one dialectic, we can see the same structure, the same terms, the same hierarchical arrangement, the same use of question and answers when you use it with a friend, the same reasoning through together, and the same structure of DDAS, definition, demonstration, division. These are the divisions. And then we have, so we say division. And then we have the synthesis. Therefore, it's not at rest or becoming at rest or standing still. Okay? So if it's at rest, it's in something. From what we've already shown, self cannot be in. It's anything or itself. Therefore, the one of the one self is never in self. Therefore, synthesize it all together. S-Y-N-T-H. Therefore, it's not at rest nor becoming at rest or led to stand still. Now, the other half of synthesis is you analyze. Analysis. Which is what? Taking that synthesis from your divisions and applying it back to the start. Right? Back to the start, back to the self, back to the subject of the dialectic. So, let's find it in the text. So the one is never in the self, given that division to the arguments. It can never be at rest or led to be at rest or led to stand still. Accordingly then, this is the synthesis. The one neither stands still nor is moved. Accordingly then, that's a key word. And therefore at the end of the whole thing, accordingly then, look for that. Appa, right? The big fluffy creature that the Avatar flew around on, right? He takes you back to the beginning. Takes you back to the beginning, which is also your destination. Hero's journey comes all the way around. You go on a big journey and you come back to the self, which was at the start the whole time, right? So Appa, the big fluffy creature that the Avatar flies on in the cartoon series, The Avatar, and the movies, maybe. I never watched the movies. Live action now too, but the cartoons are best. Appa is the Greek for accordingly then. So that's what we look out for. It takes us back to the start. Accordingly then, the one neither stands still nor is moved. And right at the back, the start of this argument, we said it is neither stationary or being moved. It's neither standing still. Oh, what's that in Greek? Estanai, or being moved. Where does Appa take us? Appa, neither stand still nor being moved. Isn't that cool? So what does that mean? Therefore, accordingly then, Appa, the one. Now let me make sure that's it. Now, is that a P? My Greek's a bit rusty. No, it's not P. Maybe. Okay, I just created a beautiful analogy about Appa. I want to make sure it actually fits. Because I like Appa. So what I'm doing now is I am making sure that this is how you pronounce it, because my Greek is a bit rusty. Ara. God damn it. The P in Greek is actually an A. Ara. Alright. Ara. Alright. But it looks like Appa, so I can still use it. Ara. Accordingly then, the one, so these were arguments about the self or the one self that we're taking with us. We apply it to the one. So this is important. We're talking about self, but we did talk about the one. The one is never in the self, but it's specifically the conclusion that we came to about that one is the one of the one self. So what we're learning about the one self, we're taking with us. We're concluding that it's not a rest, not coming into rest. That's the synthesis of our divisions, and then we apply it back to the start. We fly on Appa, who we name Ara because we're doing a Greek version of the avatar. Therefore, the one. Neither stand still nor is moved. That's the end of the argument. How pretty. And we've learned something new today about the one. And what do? We apply it to the self too. So we're learning something new about the one of the one self. What you are, what the self is, what the one self really is, ultimately, doesn't move. Can't change it. Doesn't matter how rich you get. Doesn't matter how ugly you get. Doesn't move. The self doesn't move. It doesn't change. Doesn't change according to what? Doesn't change according to alteration. Doesn't move. These are the kinds of movements. While your looks or something might change, the self does not change according to alteration. It's always the same one. In fact, the Greek word for self is same. The Greek word for same is also the self. Interesting. So, yourself doesn't rotate. Can't spin around in circles and change yourself. It can't go from somewhere because it was never in anything to begin with. So you can't go to a place to look for the self. You want to find the self? Don't bother trying to find it in a place. And it can't come into another place because that would require it to be parts. So the self isn't moving. Therefore, the one of the one self is not moving. It's immovable. Can't move it. This is important, right? One of the people who've had near-death experiences or spiritual experiences or this kind of experience of either being or the one self that we're after here, that is even beyond being, is they say they overcome their fear of death. This is in the Phaedo as well. Plato's text, the Phaedo. Overcoming the fear of death. Well, if you recognized the self and you saw that it can't be changing, can't be moving around, can't be shooken up by things like death, it can't be changed by death, it's not in anything, and it's not going anywhere, and you recognize it's immovable, maybe this will play into your overcoming of your fear of death of the self when you recognize this about yourself fundamentally. Oh, and by the way, it's not even at rest either. So you don't have to worry about it having to be led to stand still. You're already where you need to be. By the way, it's beyond rest. The kind of rest that's beyond rest. It's not at rest. It's beyond even that. You don't have to worry about coming to be at peace. At peace was one of the words mentioned. neither stands still nor is moved. That's the self. So again, some more things we're learning about ourselves, but also negatives. It's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not whole, it's not part, it's not many, it's not limited, doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end, doesn't have a shape, not circular or straight, doesn't have a shape, doesn't exist in anything. And it's not in motion, and it's not at rest, and it's not coming to be either of those things. It's not standing still, it's not moving. So more things we can learn about the nature of ourself, the one self, and also more we can learn about the way of reasoning, so we can come to these conclusions and do our own dialectics and have our own conversations to ourselves and to our friends. Hey, maybe you're down or you're worried about being at rest or worried about it being in motion. If you have this, if it's yours, you can use it to bring yourself out of those problems or answer those objections from people in society or whatever, or from your past. You can bring yourself at rest by realizing that the self, the one self, is beyond even rest. It is not in motion nor at rest, and beyond even existence. Remember, this is the higher. This isn't a complete negation. This isn't saying there's nothing. There is the self. That's the whole premise. If one self is, it is. But it's in such a high way that it's beyond even motion, beyond even coming to be at rest or standing still. It's beyond even existence. Not in anything. Because that would be a thing that's in. It wouldn't be the ultimate if it was in something else. That thing that it would be in would be prior to it and therefore better than it, higher than it. Right, so we're learning about the ultimate nature of our own self. Using our highest terms, our use of our own mind, our own intellect, the terms that we're picking up in our key term sack, the questions that we're bringing in our question sack, our skill tree of looking for patterns, like sulfur pairs, like the 4 parts of the dialectic: definition, demonstration, division, synthesis, analysis. So we can make it our own. Make it our own, see through it, function through it, use it to know ourselves. That is Usia. That's the most like the divine we can be in our everyday world. Hope you find this interesting. I hope you find this fun. Let's get back into it next time. I hope you find something to think about, to take with you in your day. When you're moving around in your day, or you're being led to stand still in your day, caught in traffic maybe. Hope there's something from this that you can wonder about. Is the self really at rest or being led to stand still? Is the self moving about in the day? If it's not, then what is this appearance that I'm seeing with my senses where I appear to be moving around, going from one job to another, going from this to that in my everyday? I hope you had something to think about. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.